He fired her like she was nothing. She stood in the middle of that auditorium, surrounded by silence and stares, and let him finish every sentence. What Victor Ashgrove did not know was that the woman he just destroyed now owned his entire world. Serena Caldwell arrived at the Meridian Harcourt building every morning before anyone else on her floor. She came through the service entrance, not because she was required to, but because it was closer to the bus stop, and Serena had learned long ago that saving 7 minutes meant 7 more minutes of work before the chaos began. Her shoes were resoled twice. Her blazer was the same dark grey one she had bought on sale with her very first pay, and her satchel, brown leather with a strap she had mended herself using thread borrowed from her mother, carried everything that mattered: her laptop, a notebook filled with project timelines in tiny, precise handwriting, and a photograph of her mother tucked into the front pocket like a quiet prayer. The Meridian Harcourt Group occupied a tower of steel and tinted glass in the financial district. The lobby alone could swallow a church, white marble, a reception desk the length of a car, and behind it the words Meridian Harcourt Group, mounted in brushed gold. The company had been built decades ago by Leonard Harcourt, a name most employees knew only from a portrait in the executive corridor and a signature on annual reports. Leonard had retreated from operations years earlier, disappearing from public life so completely that newer staff wondered if he was still alive. He was, but only a handful of people in that building knew the truth of his silence. The man who ran things now was Victor Ashgrove. Victor had been appointed CEO after a boardroom negotiation people still whispered about. He arrived with a reputation for results and a talent for making everyone feel replaceable. Tall, sharp-featured, dark hair combed back so precisely it looked painted on, he wore suits that cost more than most employees earned in a month, and a watch so polished it caught the light every time he gestured. Every movement was a performance, every sentence a verdict. Serena had worked there nearly 4 years, filling a role in operational strategy, a division most people could not describe, but that quietly kept the entire corporation turning. She had been hired through the standard process, scored highest on every evaluation, and received her offer in a letter that still sat in a drawer in her mother's kitchen, framed in a cheap plastic frame Rosa had bought at a pound shop that same afternoon. Rosa Caldwell had come to this country carrying a suitcase and a daughter. She spoke with an accent that thickened when she was tired and softened when she sang, and she had spent years cleaning the offices of buildings she could never afford to work in. Serena remembered those years like a recurring dream: the smell of bleach on her mother's hands at the end of every shift, the sound of Rosa humming while ironing uniforms, the sight of her mother's face reflected in the glass doors of corporate towers as she mopped floors inside them, invisible to every person who walked past. Rosa never complained. She pressed her palm against Serena's cheek every morning before leaving and said the same thing. "You are going to be someone, my love, not because the world will hand it to you, because you will build it with your own hands." And that was exactly what Serena did. Every project delivered ahead of schedule, under budget, meticulously documented. She did not network. She did not play politics. She worked. And her work spoke in a voice louder than anything Victor Ashgrove had ever heard from someone at her level, which was precisely the problem. On the morning that would change everything, Serena stepped out of the lift and immediately sensed something wrong. The corridor had a different texture, not the usual hum of keyboards, but a silence that pressed against the walls like held breath. 2 colleagues saw her and looked away so quickly it seemed rehearsed. A manager she respected walked past without eye contact, jaw tight, steps too fast. When she reached her desk, Dorothy Calloway was waiting. Dorothy was the head of corporate administration, a title that captured almost nothing of what she actually was. She had been at Meridian Harcourt longer than anyone. Silver hair gathered in a low bun, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a way of looking at people that made them feel simultaneously seen and protected. For reasons Serena had never understood, Dorothy had taken an interest in her from the first week, bringing tea, appearing before difficult meetings with quiet advice, checking on her with a tenderness that went far beyond professional duty, an almost maternal vigilance that Serena noticed but never questioned, because it felt too precious to examine and risk losing. "Serena." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. Her knuckles were white against the desk. "Victor has called a company-wide assembly, the main auditorium, less than an hour." "About what?" "Your infrastructure realignment proposal, the one you submitted through the Innovation Channel." Dorothy glanced around before continuing. It reached Leonard Harcourt directly. The founder read it and told the board it was the most forward-thinking operational document he had seen in years. He mentioned your name. Leonard Harcourt mentioned my name. And Victor found out. A project he never approved, praised by the founder with your name attached. Dorothy gripped Serena's shoulders. Whatever happens in that auditorium, you do not react. You do not give him the satisfaction of seeing you break. I will be right behind you. The next 45 minutes dissolved into a blur of metallic anxiety. Serena tried to open files, but her hands trembled too badly to navigate. Colleagues glanced in her direction and looked away, as though she was something fragile that might shatter if observed directly. When the time came, she walked to the auditorium with a river of employees. The room was vast, rows of dark seats sloping toward a stage with a lectern and 2 projection screens. She sat in the 3rd row. Dorothy appeared and sat directly behind her, one hand on the back of Serena's chair like an anchor in a storm. 400 people filled the room. The silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of a crowd waiting for something they did not want to witness. The stage door opened. Victor walked out with the stride of a man who had already decided the ending. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. He placed his hands on the lectern and surveyed the room the way a general surveys a conquered field. Let me be brief. This company operates on structure, protocols, chains of authority. When those are respected, we succeed. When individuals decide their personal ambitions matter more than the system, we have a problem. Eyes began turning towards Serena. Recently, an employee submitted a project without executive sign-off, without my knowledge. That project reached board-level discussions and was presented to the founder, a man who should never have been burdened with an unvetted proposal from an entry-level department. Entry-level. The word landed on Serena's chest like a stone. Serena Caldwell. The name cracked through the speakers like a gavel. Stand up. She stood. 400 faces turned toward her, and the weight of their gaze pressed against her skin. She straightened her back and looked at the stage. Victor descended the steps and walked down the center aisle. Slow, deliberate. Employees shrank as he passed. He stopped 2 meters from Serena and looked at her with the expression of a man who believed proximity to power entitled him to diminish anyone who threatened it. This employee bypassed every protocol. She submitted a document that had no right to reach the board, and she did it, knowing it would undermine the authority of this office. Mr. Ashgrove, the Innovation Channel is open to all employees. The submission followed every guideline. I did not give you permission to speak. The auditorium flinched. You do not get to decide what reaches the board. You are not qualified to make decisions at that level, and frankly, you are not qualified to remain at this company. Every word landed with surgical precision. Not loud, Victor rarely needed volume. His weapon was the ability to say devastating things in a tone so measured it sounded like reason. You're fired, effective immediately. Collect your belongings and leave. The silence was absolute. 400 people suspended in a single held breath. Serena felt heat climb from her chest to her eyes, a pressure so intense she thought her body would betray her. But she did not cry. She locked her jaw, pressed her nails into her palms, and held. She looked at Victor one final time. His eyes were steady, waiting for the collapse, wanting it. If doing excellent work is a reason to be dismissed, Serena said, and her voice came out so calm that people in the front row leaned forward, then perhaps the problem was never my work. She turned her back. She walked up the aisle, and every step resonated through the silent room like a pulse. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped through without looking back. The corridor was empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like indifferent witnesses. She walked to her desk, found the cardboard box that Human Resources always kept beside the supply cupboard, and began to pack. The mug Rosa had given her on her first day, white ceramic, brave before coffee in faded blue ink. "So you remember courage comes first and caffeine comes second," Rosa had said, laughing. A small cactus in a clay pot that Dorothy had placed on her desk one morning, saying only, "Because it survives anything just like you." The framed photo of Serena and Rosa outside the building on the day she was hired. Rosa beaming with a pride so fierce it radiated from the image, her cleaning uniform still visible beneath the coat she had thrown on to come straight from a shift. Every object that entered the box carried weight far beyond its size. When she sealed the box, the tears came. Quiet, sliding down in silence, because the pain was too deep for sound. She was not crying because she lost a job. She was crying because she had given 4 years to a place that never truly saw her, and the one moment she was finally seen, it was only so she could be erased. Serena. Dorothy's voice. Thick, trembling. Serena turned and saw the older woman in the doorway, glasses removed, eyes swollen, gripping her phone as though she had just ended a call that changed something fundamental. "Dorothy, you don't need to... Listen to me." Dorothy gripped Serena's hands with startling force. "You are going to go home. You are going to hold your mother. And when I call you, and I will call you, you are going to answer. Because what happened in that auditorium is not where your story ends." Her voice broke, and for one raw second, Serena saw something behind the composure she had never seen. A grief that was personal, not professional. "It is where it begins." "What are you talking about? I was just fired in front of everyone." Dorothy pulled her into an embrace. Tight, prolonged, fierce. It did not feel like a colleague's hug. It felt like someone who had been holding back a secret for years and could feel it pressing against the walls of her chest, demanding release. When she stepped back, Dorothy placed her hand on Serena's face, gently, tenderly, exactly the way Rosa did every morning, and whispered, "There are people connected to this company who care about you in ways you cannot understand right now. Trust me, just a little longer." Serena left, carrying the box and a silence louder than anything Victor had said. The morning sun struck the glass facade and lit the name in gold against the sky. Meridian Harcourt. A name that meant nothing to her in that moment, but it carried a secret that would change everything she believed about herself, about her father, and about the family she thought she never had. The weeks that followed were the quietest Serena had ever known, and not the kind of quiet that heals. It was the quiet of someone whose alarm clock has lost its purpose, of mornings that begin with nowhere to go and end with the same ceiling staring back. She spent the first days at the kitchen table with Rosa, drinking tea that went cold before she could finish it, watching her mother move through the flat with the steady rhythm of someone who refuses to let stillness win. Rosa did what she had always done when the world pressed too hard. She kept working, ironed a neighbor's shirts before breakfast, cleaned the kitchen floor twice, even though it was spotless, prepared lunch with the precision of someone who believes feeding the people you love is a form of prayer. And between tasks, she sat beside Serena and said nothing, because Rosa understood that sometimes the most powerful thing a mother can do is simply remain. "It's not about finding another job, Mum," Serena said one evening, staring at the calendar where Rosa had circled her shifts in blue ink. The circles were still there, the shifts were not. "It's about what was taken. 4 years. Every weekend. Every project." He threw it all away as though none of it existed. Rosa looked at her daughter with brown eyes that had survived decades of being underestimated. "The man who fired you destroyed something that belonged to him, a position, a badge, a desk. But your mind, your work, your ability to walk into a room and make it better, those belong to you. He never touched those." Then, on a morning that looked no different from any other, her phone rang. It was Dorothy. "Good morning, my dear. Listen carefully." Dorothy's voice was tighter, every word placed with the deliberateness of someone building a bridge one plank at a time. "The board convened an independent review of your proposal. They brought in an external consultancy with no connection to Victor. And they called it one of the most comprehensive operational frameworks in the sector. The board voted unanimously to implement it. A pause like the space between lightning and thunder. They want you back, Serena. A senior strategic role, reporting directly to the board, not to Victor." The kitchen tilted. "That's not possible. Victor would never..." "Victor does not have a say." The board overruled him. Leonard Harcourt himself endorsed the decision. Another pause, heavier. "Will you come?" Serena looked at Rosa. Her mother had set down her work and was watching with an expression that held no surprise, only the quiet certainty of someone who had always known this call would arrive. Rosa gave a single nod, small and fierce, and in that nod lived every early shift, every bleach-scrubbed floor, every silent sacrifice. "I'll come." Walking back into the Meridian Harcourt building felt like returning to a place where she had been wounded, and the wound had not yet closed. But this time the security guard at the main entrance looked directly at her and said, "Welcome back, Miss Caldwell." It was the first time in 4 years anyone at that door had used her name. Dorothy was waiting by the lifts. Same silver hair, same tortoiseshell clip, but something new in her bearing, the straightness of someone who had been holding her breath for a long time and could finally exhale. "Your new office is on the executive floor." That's where the board meets. Dorothy pressed the button. And it is where you belong. The office was modest. Glass desk, 2 chairs, a window framing the city skyline. Dorothy appeared every morning with tea, lingering longer than necessary, asking questions about Serena's well-being that went deeper than professional courtesy. "Dorothy, why do you come here every morning?" Serena asked one of those days. "Because I like to make sure things are where they should be." Dorothy did not look up, but her fingers trembled. "You're doing beautifully, my girl, better than—" She stopped. The sentence hung in the air like a door opened and then closed. Better than who? Better than anyone could have managed in this little time. The smile was warm but incomplete, a photograph cropped to hide something at the edge. Serena stored that unfinished sentence alongside the other fragments. The embrace, the hand on her cheek, the words, "It is where it begins." Pieces of something she could not yet name, but could feel growing clearer every day. The results came quickly. Serena redesigned the approval workflow and cut execution timelines so sharply that finance requested a second verification, assuming the figures were wrong. She built a communication protocol that eliminated redundant reporting across departments. And when the board received her first quarterly assessment, there was a stillness in the room that veteran directors said they had never witnessed. But as Serena rose, Victor sharpened. It began with small things she dismissed as coincidence. An email with outdated supplier figures designed to lead her into an expensive mistake. A meeting with international partners rescheduled without notice, making her arrive late before people who judged punctuality as character. A presentation file that vanished from her shared drive hours before a board review. Then came the whispers. "They say the promotion was a personal favor. She must have connections none of us know about. Does she really have the talent, or was she in the right place at the right time?" The gossip reached Serena through the only colleague who still sat with her at lunch, Bryn Hollister, a data analyst with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "Victor's people are running a campaign against you," Bryn said. "Every floor, every kitchen, every lift. Let them talk. My numbers speak for themselves. Your numbers are incredible, Serena, but numbers don't stop poison. And in this building, gossip is the most effective poison there is." Bryn leaned forward. "I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know what you're walking into every morning." Serena knew Bryn was right, but she could not afford to spend energy chasing shadows when there was so much left to prove. To the board, to the employees who had watched her leave with a cardboard box, and to the voice inside her own head that still whispered every time the lift doors opened on the executive floor that she did not belong there. It was on an ordinary afternoon, weeks after her return, that everything shifted. Serena was alone in the boardroom preparing charts, papers spread across the table, afternoon light casting warm rectangles on the polished wood. The door opened. Dorothy entered first, straighter, more alert than usual, every step an act of ceremony. And behind her, walking with slow but certain steps, came a man whose presence changed the temperature of the room. White hair, a face carved by time with great care. Dark eyes carrying a vitality no number of years could diminish. He wore a simple navy suit, and on his left wrist an old watch. Not an expensive piece, but one that carried history in its scratched glass and worn leather strap. He moved with authority that needed no announcement. "Miss Caldwell," Dorothy said with a formality that sounded sacred. "This is Mr. Leonard Harcourt, founder and chairman of the board." Serena stood so quickly her chair struck the wall. "Mr. Harcourt, it is an honor." Leonard did not respond immediately. He studied her with an intensity that went beyond professional assessment, the gaze of someone searching for something specific in her face, something he already knew was there but needed to witness firsthand. "The honor is mine," he said. His voice was deep, steady, layered with emotion she could not explain. "I have followed your work. Your results are remarkable." "Thank you, sir. But I did not come to discuss numbers." He sat with the ease of someone who had occupied that chair 1,000 times. "I came to meet the person behind them." Leonard asked nothing about projections or metrics. He asked about her, her education, her path to the company, what drove her, and Serena found herself answering with an honesty that surprised even her. "My mother raised me alone. She came to this country with nothing and worked cleaning offices so I could have a chance she never had. Everything I do is to make her sacrifice mean something." When she mentioned Rosa's work, something shifted behind Leonard's eyes, a flicker, quick and involuntary. He glanced down at the old watch on his wrist with a gesture that seemed unconscious, as though the watch held a connection to something she had just touched without knowing. "Your mother must be extraordinarily proud of you." "She is. She never says it in those words, but I see it when she looks at me and thinks I'm not watching." Leonard was quiet a moment longer than felt natural. Dorothy stood against the wall, eyes glistening, lips pressed together, as though holding back something enormous. "And your father?" The question came soft, almost hesitant. Serena felt a tightness in her chest. "He passed away when I was very young. Mum doesn't talk much about his family. She says there were things he never explained, people he lost contact with." Leonard's hands on the table went completely still. "I believe your father would be immensely proud of what you have built here." The sentence carried a weight that pressed against her ribs. It felt as though he was speaking from knowledge, not courtesy. "You say that as though you knew him," she said softly. Leonard held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Dorothy closed her eyes. "I say it as someone who recognizes a parent's character through the strength of their child." The answer was careful, perfect. But his eyes, shining with something he was fighting to contain, told a story his words were not yet ready to speak. When he rose to leave, he shook her hand, and the warmth of his grip settled somewhere near her heart. "We will meet again, Miss Caldwell. You can be certain of that." After he left, Serena stared at the closed door. Dorothy placed a hand on her shoulder. "What just happened?" "What needed to happen, my dear? He needed to see for himself." "See what?" Dorothy removed her glasses, wiped a tear, and left without answering. That night, Serena told Rosa about the encounter. Rosa listened while folding laundry, hands moving with mechanical precision. "He looked at me strangely, Mum, as though he already knew me. And when I mentioned Dad, something changed in his eyes." Rosa's hands stopped. The shirt hung suspended between her fingers. "Serena, your father told me something once, not long before he passed. He said one day I would understand why he never spoke about his family. He said there were people who got lost along the way, and that sometimes the ones we believe have disappeared are closer than we think." "What does that mean?" "I never knew, my love. He was gone before he could explain." Rosa returned to folding, but her hands had lost their steadiness. "But maybe it is time someone found out." Serena lay awake with her mind on fire, the name Harcourt glowing on the facade, the old watch, Dorothy's tears, her father's words about lost family, and a name she had seen only once, written in faded ink on a birth certificate her mother kept in a shoebox at the bottom of the wardrobe. Alma Harcourt. Harcourt, Alma Harcourt, Leonard Harcourt. The pieces were there, scattered like fragments of a mirror, each reflecting a sliver of something larger. But the full image had not formed. A central piece was missing, the one connecting a corporate empire, a reclusive founder, a dead father's silence, and a daughter who had spent her life believing she had been forgotten by the family she never knew. She did not know that across the city, Victor Ashgrove sat before a manila folder a private investigator had delivered that evening. Inside, certificates, genealogical records, documents tracing a bloodline that connected a cleaning woman's daughter to the most powerful name in the company. Victor read every page twice, and when he finished he leaned back and smiled, because he believed he had found the weapon that would destroy Serena Caldwell once and for all. He had no idea it was the weapon that would destroy him. The news arrived on a morning when the sky hung low and grey, the kind of sky that seems to hold its breath before something enormous falls. An official memo sent by email to every employee of the Meridian Harcourt Group before most of them had left their homes. The subject line was direct: Office of the Chairman, Leadership Transition. Serena read the email 3 times, sitting on the edge of her bed, the phone trembling in her hands. Leonard Harcourt, founder and chairman of the board, was officially announcing his retirement. After decades devoted to the company he had built from nothing, he would be passing leadership to a successor who would be revealed at a formal ceremony at the corporate headquarters the following week. The email mentioned no names. It gave no hints. It said only that the choice had been made based on values that transcend technical competence, values of character, integrity, and a commitment to the people who make this company what it is. Rosa appeared at the bedroom door holding a cup of tea. "Everything all right, love? You look pale." "The founder is retiring." "And is that a bad thing?" Serena looked at her mother without knowing how to answer. It was not bad, but it was not simple, because since meeting Leonard weeks earlier, something had shifted inside her, a quiet unease, a feeling that something far larger was unfolding around her, something that connected that man, that building, and the name she saw lit in gold on the facade every morning. At the office, the memo transformed every corridor into a hive of speculation. Groups gathered in kitchens, near printers, inside lifts. Everyone had a theory about the successor, and the name that surfaced most often was Victor Ashgrove. Years of strong financial performance, his allies repeated like a chorus. Who else could it be? But Serena noticed another current, quieter, more careful. Long-serving employees who remembered the company when Leonard still walked the hallways exchanged glances whenever the topic arose. More than once, Serena realized those glances were directed at her. Victor, for his part, moved through the building as though the appointment were already sealed. He called meetings with directors, shook hands in every corridor, made certain he was seen lunching with board members. But beneath the performance, something had changed. The few times Serena crossed his path, his gaze was no longer the dismissive contempt she had known for years. It was something colder, more calculated, the look of someone holding a card and waiting for the precise moment to play it. The manila folder. Serena did not know about the folder, but she sensed the shift, and it sent a chill through her that no blazer could warm. Days before the ceremony, Dorothy appeared in Serena's office with an expression she had never worn, a blend of anxiety and solemnity, as though she were preparing for a moment she had waited her entire life to witness. "My dear, Mr. Harcourt wants to see you today, in his private office." "About what?" He didn't say. But the way Dorothy pressed her hands together, fingers laced so tightly the knuckles whitened, told a different story. She knew exactly what it was about. Serena walked along the top-floor corridor with her heart beating at a rhythm that felt wrong, too strong, too slow, as though her body were bracing for something monumental. Dorothy walked beside her in silence, but with each step, her energy was transforming. The usual professional composure was giving way to something raw, more exposed, more human. When they reached the door, Dorothy stopped. She gripped Serena's arm and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made the corridor, the building, the entire world outside disappear. "What you are about to discover in there will change everything you know about yourself." Her voice was shaking, but every word carried the precision of a sentence rehearsed 1,000 times. "But I need you to know something before you walk in. Everything you have achieved at this company, every project, every result, every ounce of respect you have earned, was on your own merit. Yours alone. Nobody handed you anything you did not deserve. Do you understand?" "Dorothy, what? Do you understand?" The repetition came firm, almost urgent. "I understand." Dorothy nodded, released her arm, and opened the door. Leonard's office was bathed in the soft amber light of the afternoon, pouring through an enormous window behind his desk. Bookshelves lined with old volumes, a worn rug in deep red and navy, a scent of aged wood that stirred in Serena an inexplicable feeling of belonging, as though this room had been waiting for her without either of them knowing. Leonard was standing beside the desk, and on the surface a photograph in a wooden frame, one that had always faced his side of the room, was now positioned toward the visitor's chair, deliberately, as though it had been placed there for her. "Sit down, Serena." It was the first time he had used her first name. His voice was different, lower, more fragile, carrying an emotion he was no longer trying to disguise. Serena sat. Her eyes were pulled toward the photograph, but she forced herself to look at Leonard first. He seemed older than the last time, not physically, but in his eyes, where layers of protection had been stripped away one by one, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. "I am going to tell you a story," he began, lowering himself into the chair behind the desk. "A story I should have told a long time ago, but that life, cowardice, and the fear of losing someone I had not yet found would not let me tell." Serena's mouth went dry. "Long before any of this existed," he gestured at the walls, the building, the empire, "I had a sister. Her name was Alma." The room stopped. The hum of the air conditioning vanished. The amber light froze against the glass. The only thing that existed was that name, Alma, ringing through the silence like a bell struck inside a cathedral. Alma was older than me. She practically raised me when our parents were too worn out from work to manage. She took jobs before sunrise, so there would be food on the table, and she sat with me after dark, helping me study with a torch and a borrowed notebook. Leonard's voice trembled. She was everything I had. Serena could not move. When I left our small town to chase opportunity in the city, Alma stayed behind. She married, moved to another region. In those days, communication was not what it is now. Letters came and went, and then one day they stopped, and I, consumed by the company I was building, convinced there would always be time, took far too long to go looking for her. A tear traced a line down Leonard's face, following a groove that time had carved. When I finally searched, I learned that Alma had passed away, that she had had a son, and that her son had also gone too soon. "My father," Serena whispered. The words came on their own, as though her body had understood before her mind could catch up. "Your father was my nephew." Leonard raised his eyes to hers, and what Serena saw was decades of pain finally finding a way out. "Marcus, son of my Alma, and you, Serena, are my great niece, the last living member of my family." The silence that filled the room was not empty. It was dense and heavy, loaded with years that could not be recovered, embraces that were never given, holidays that were never shared. A grandmother Serena had known only as a name on a birth certificate kept in a shoebox at the bottom of a wardrobe. "You looked for me? I spent years searching, and when your name appeared on a CV that arrived at this company, by chance or by something larger than chance, I knew." His voice broke. "I knew that Alma had given me one last gift." Serena looked at the photograph, and now she saw it clearly. A young woman with dark hair and wide, luminous eyes, holding a baby in her arms with a smile that overflowed with tenderness. The frame was old, the wood slightly chipped at the corners, the glass faintly yellowed. The woman in the photograph was identical, feature for feature, smile for smile, to the face Serena had seen in the birth certificate her mother kept hidden. It was Alma, and the baby wrapped in a pale blanket was Marcus, her father. The tears came like a wall collapsing. They were not tears of sadness. They were the tears of a lifetime spent believing she had been forgotten by her father's family, that nobody had cared enough to search, that she was not important enough to be found. And now, sitting in this room, before a man who had built an empire but never stopped looking for the family he lost, everything she had believed shattered. "I thought nobody came looking for me," Serena said through sobs. "My whole life I thought my father's family just didn't care." Leonard rose, walked around the desk and stood before her. With hands that trembled as much as hers, he held Serena's face between his palms and looked at her as though he were witnessing something he had stopped believing was possible. "You were never forgotten, my girl, never. I searched for you in every face for years. And when I finally found you, I needed to be certain that every step you took in this company was your own, because you are just like my Alma, strong, dignified, brilliant, and I was not going to let anyone take that from you." Dorothy, who had remained by the door the entire time, was crying without sound, both hands covering her mouth, glasses fogged with tears. Serena stood and embraced Leonard. The old founder wrapped his great niece in arms that had not held a member of his own family in decades, and in that embrace, two solitudes that had existed on opposite sides of time finally found each other. When they separated, Leonard held her hands and spoke with a voice that carried not only emotion but resolve. "There is one more thing. The reason I asked you here today." Serena wiped her tears. "What?" "The succession. I have chosen who will lead this company when I retire." He squeezed her hands. "And I have chosen you, Serena." Before she could process the magnitude of those words, the office door exploded open. The handle struck the wall with a sound that split the air like a crack of thunder. Victor Ashgrove stood in the doorway, breathless, face flushed, the manila folder crumpled in his fist. His suit was disheveled, his tie pulled loose. It was the first time Serena had ever seen him stripped of his armor of calculated perfection. Behind him, Dr. Evelyn Marsh and Dr. Theodore Graves, two senior board members he had brought as witnesses, stood frozen in the threshold, visibly shocked by the scene before them. "Want to know why she's being chosen?" Victor's voice shook with barely contained fury. "Not because of competence, because of blood. This woman is related to him." He waved the folder in the air. "Certificates, genealogical records. It's all here. This is nepotism. This is fraud." Leonard turned to face Victor with a calm so absolute it was devastating. "Have you finished, Mr. Ashgrove?" "I haven't finished. This board needs to know that the founder is handing this company to a relative instead of following the succession protocol." The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were enough to change the fate of every person in that room, because Leonard smiled, and that smile was not born of anger or surprise or fear. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Thank you, Victor," he said quietly. "You have just given me the last reason I needed to be absolutely certain of my decision." The silence that settled in Leonard's office after Victor's accusation lasted only 3 seconds, but they were the 3 longest seconds of Serena's life. She still felt the tears drying on her face, still felt the warmth of Leonard's embrace in her bones, and now she had to stand in the same room as the man who had destroyed her dignity in front of 400 people, waving certificates like evidence of a crime. Leonard did not move, did not raise his voice, He simply looked at the 2 board members Victor had dragged along and said with the calm of a man who has played enough chess to know when his opponent has just sacrificed his own queen, "Dr. Marsh, Dr. Graves, I appreciate your presence. In fact, it makes what I am about to do considerably easier." He walked to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. From inside, he drew a blue folder, thick, worn at the edges, clearly assembled over a long period of time. It had the weight of something that had been waiting in that drawer for precisely this moment. This folder contains the complete performance record of Miss Serena Caldwell since the day she joined this company. Every project she delivered, every evaluation from supervisors and peers, every quarterly assessment, including 3 independent external reviews that I personally commissioned from firms with no connection to this company or to me. He placed the folder on the desk and slid it toward the board members. It also contains the full audit trail of every hiring and promotion decision involving Miss Caldwell. Every step documented, every decision rooted in verifiable, measurable merit. Dr. Marsh and Dr. Graves opened the folder and began reading in silence. Victor, still clutching the manila folder, watched the blue folder slide across the desk the way a man watches the ground crack beneath his own feet. "The family connection between Miss Caldwell and myself is real," Leonard continued. "I have never denied it. I do not intend to deny it now, but her competence is also real. And unlike you, Mr. Ashgrove, I have never needed to diminish another person's achievements to justify my own." Victor opened his mouth, but Dr. Graves raised a hand, palm flat, fingers steady, and the gesture carried more authority than any shout could have. "Mr. Ashgrove," Dr. Graves said without lifting his eyes from the documents, "you entered the founder's private office without invitation. You brought 2 board members here without formal convocation, and you presented an accusation of nepotism without first verifying whether evidence existed to refute it." He closed the folder with deliberate care. "This is not the conduct of a leader. This is the conduct of a man protecting his own position. I was protecting the interests of the company," Victor said, but the conviction was bleeding from his voice like color from a photograph left too long in the sun. "No," Dr. Marsh said, leaning forward. "You were protecting yourself." She removed her reading glasses and set them on the table. "Over recent months, this board has received multiple reports of internal sabotage, manipulated emails, rescheduled meetings, critical documents removed from shared systems. We engaged an independent firm to investigate. Your behavior today confirms everything that investigation uncovered." Victor's face passed through 3 colors in 5 seconds. Red with fury, white with fear, and finally gray, the color of a man who understands he has just signed his own sentence. The manila folder dropped to his side. For the first time in all the years Serena had known him, the calculated composure that defined Victor Ashgrove was completely gone. "I can explain, and there is nothing to explain," Leonard said, and for the first time there was a hardness in his voice, not anger, but something more final, certainty. "Victor, you delivered financial results. Nobody denies that. But results without integrity are a building without a foundation, and I did not spend my life creating this company to watch it become a building without a foundation." He looked at Victor with steady, unwavering eyes. "What you did when nobody was watching, Mr. Ashgrove, was try to destroy a woman whose only ambition was to work with dignity." Victor stood perfectly still, stripped of every mask he had ever worn. No more arguments, no more strategies, only a man confronted by the reflection of what he had become. "The formal decision regarding your position will be communicated by the board within the week," Dr. Graves said, rising from his chair. "But I consider the founder's choice of successor not only legitimate, but necessary." Dr. Marsh stood as well. "This company needs leadership built on the same values upon which it was founded. Today we have seen what that looks like, and what it does not." Victor left the room without a word. His footsteps down the corridor no longer carried the rhythm of authority. They were the steps of someone who knew he had walked through the last door on that floor with any power behind his name. When the room emptied, leaving only Serena, Leonard, and Dorothy, the silence that remained was entirely different from the one that had come before. It was a silence of relief, of arrival, of something finally resting in its rightful place. Dorothy approached. She removed her fogged glasses, cleaned them with the edge of her sleeve, a gesture so familiar it made Serena's chest ache, and sat in the chair beside her. "I think it is my turn to tell my part," Dorothy said quietly. Serena looked at her. "Your part? When Mr. Harcourt discovered you existed, he called me into this very office and asked me something I never expected to hear." Dorothy looked at Leonard with a tenderness that overflowed with decades of loyalty and shared history. "He asked me to watch over you, to look after you as though you were my own granddaughter, to make sure nobody in this building could harm you before you had the chance to prove who you truly were. And you accepted." "I accepted because I have known this man since he was a young lad with calloused hands and a dream too large for the room we worked in. In the early years of this company, when it was just the two of us in a rented office with one desk and a telephone that rang more with debt collectors than clients, he used to tell me about his sister. He spoke about Alma the way most people speak about someone sacred, with reverence and with grief." Dorothy's voice cracked. "When he told me about you, when I saw in his eyes the same light I used to see when he spoke of Alma, I knew that watching over you would not be a duty. It would be the greatest honor of my life." Serena held Dorothy's hand. "You were far more than a mentor, Dorothy. Every morning you brought me tea. Every crisis you appeared before I even asked. The cactus on my desk. The warnings before meetings. You were the family I didn't know I had inside this building." Dorothy squeezed her hand and the tears came again, but this time accompanied by a wide, true smile that transformed her entire face. "Your grandmother Alma would be so proud of you, my girl, so terribly, wonderfully proud." "The phone call," Serena said suddenly. "The day I was fired. You were holding your phone as though you had just ended an urgent call. That was him, wasn't it? You called Leonard." Dorothy nodded. "The moment Victor announced the assembly, I knew what he intended. I called Mr. Harcourt immediately. That call set everything in motion. The independent review of your project, the board's intervention, your return." Serena looked at Leonard. The old founder was watching the two women with his hands clasped before him, tears still glistening on his face, but no longer falling. There was peace in his expression, the peace of a man who had carried a weight for decades and had finally set it down. "There is one more thing to do before this day ends," Leonard said. "What?" "Your mother needs to know." An hour later, Rosa Caldwell was sitting in the chairman's office with her handbag clutched in her lap and her eyes darting around the room with the careful attention of someone who has spent a lifetime entering buildings like this through service entrances, never through the front door. Serena had collected her personally, explaining nothing during the drive, only holding her hand the entire way. Rosa had asked twice what was happening, and both times Serena had said, "You need to see this for yourself, Mum." When Rosa entered the room and saw Leonard standing beside the desk, nothing happened at first. She regarded him the way one regards a polite stranger. A nod, a small uncertain smile, but when her eyes drifted to the photograph on the desk, when they found the image of Alma holding the baby, something inside Rosa Caldwell broke open. Her handbag slipped from her fingers to the floor. Her knees buckled, and Serena rushed forward to hold her. "That photograph," Rosa whispered. "That woman." "That is Alma Harcourt," Leonard said gently. "My sister, Marcus's mother, Serena's grandmother." Rosa looked from the photograph to Leonard, from Leonard to Serena, from Serena back to the photograph. The understanding arrived slowly, like a wave that builds on the horizon before it reaches the shore. "Marcus, my Marcus was your nephew." "He was. And before he passed, your husband reached out to me. He sent a letter that I received too late, weeks after he was gone." Leonard opened the desk drawer and produced an envelope yellowed by time. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and read aloud. "Mr. Harcourt, you don't know me, but I am Alma's son. My mother spoke of you as though she were speaking of a hero. She said her brother was going to change the world. I wanted to find you my whole life, but pride and fear held me back. Now I am unwell, and I know my time is short. I want you to know that I have a daughter. Her name is Serena. She is the best of me and of my mother if you ever can look after her. She deserves the world. Signed, Marcus." The paper shook in Leonard's hands. Rosa wept with her palms pressed against her face. Serena felt that every tear carried years of loneliness, unanswered questions, and nights staring at the ceiling wondering why life had taken her father so early and his family so far away. "He asked me to look after you," Leonard said, looking at Serena. "And even though the letter reached me too late to meet him, I made a promise to your father that day. A promise I have kept in silence all these years." Rosa stood, walked to Leonard and did something nobody expected. She embraced him. The cleaning woman who had mopped the floors of buildings like this embraced the founder of the empire, and in that gesture there was no hierarchy, no social distance, no divide. Only two people connected by love for the same man who was no longer there. "Marcus was right," Rosa said through her tears. "He always said the ones who got lost would come back. I never understood. Now I do." Serena watched her mother and Leonard holding each other and felt the last crack in the wall she had carried her entire life give way. The belief that she had been abandoned, forgotten, deemed unworthy of being found. It had never been true. Someone had been searching all along, and the people she thought had vanished from her story had been writing chapters of their own, chapters that were always destined to converge with hers. She thought of the cardboard box, the mug that read, "Brave before coffee," the photograph of her and Rosa on her first day. Those objects had felt like the remnants of a life being dismantled. Now they felt like seeds, small, fragile things that had survived the coldest season and were finally ready to grow. And in the quiet of that office, with the afternoon light turning gold against the old bookshelves and the worn rug beneath their feet, three people separated by time, by loss, and by silence stood together at last. But outside that room, 500 employees were still waiting. The ceremony had not taken place. The truth had not been spoken aloud to the world, and Serena knew, with the certainty of someone who had survived the worst and emerged with her dignity intact, that what was coming next would demand every ounce of the courage her mother had taught her. The auditorium was waiting, and this time she would not be walking out. The ceremony took place weeks later, in the same auditorium where Serena had been humiliated, the same stage, the same dark seats, the same hardwood lectern, but everything was different. Morning light entered through the tall windows and fell across the rows in long golden stripes, as though the building itself had dressed for the occasion. Serena stood backstage, in the narrow corridor behind the stage door, listening to the muffled sound of 500 people settling into their seats. The hum of their voices was low and constant, like the breathing of something enormous and alive. She was wearing a new blazer, not the dark grey one she had bought on sale years ago, but a deep charcoal one that Rosa had spent 2 nights tailoring by hand at the kitchen table, adjusting every seam until it sat exactly right. When Serena had protested that she could simply buy one, Rosa had shaken her head and said, "I sewed the patch on your first work bag with my own thread. I am sewing the blazer you will wear when you take over this company with my own hands." And that had been the end of the discussion. Serena had watched her mother work the fabric under the kitchen lamp, the same lamp under which Rosa had ironed 1,000 shirts for neighbors and scrubbed bleach from her own fingers after cleaning other people's offices. And she had thought, this is where it all began. Not in a boardroom, not in a tower of glass, here at this table with these hands. Dorothy appeared at her side, glasses polished, hair pinned with extra care, a small sprig of white flowers fastened to her lapel. On the windowsill of Serena's new office upstairs, the small cactus in its clay pot was still alive, still surviving, just as Dorothy had promised it would, just as Serena had. "Nervous?" Dorothy asked. "Terrified," Serena admitted. "Good. That means you understand the weight of what you're about to carry." Dorothy reached out and straightened the collar of Serena's blazer with steady fingers. "Your grandmother Alma used to say, at least that's what Leonard tells me," she said, "that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is threading the needle when your hands are shaking." Serena smiled. "You've been holding that one for a while. Since the day I met you, my dear." Dorothy's eyes glistened. "And I see her in you every single day." The backstage door opened and Leonard stepped through. Simple grey suit, the same one he always wore, the same quiet authority that needed nothing louder than his presence. But today something was different, lighter. A weight had been lifted from his shoulders, visible in the way he stood taller and breathed deeper than Serena had ever seen. On his left wrist, the old watch was still there, ticking softly, counting toward the moment it would find its new home. "Are you ready?" he asked. Serena looked at Dorothy, then at Leonard, and felt a warmth rise through her chest that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with belonging. "I'm ready." Leonard walked onto the stage first. 500 employees watched him approach the lectern with a silence so complete that each footstep echoed off the walls like a heartbeat. He placed both hands on the wood and looked out at the audience, managers, analysts, interns, maintenance workers, security staff, every person who had built their livelihood inside the walls of the company he had created. "This company was born from the work of my hands and from a dream that my sister planted in my heart when I was a child," Leonard said, and his voice filled the auditorium with a steadiness that defied the emotion swimming beneath. Alma Harcourt never saw this building. She never knew that the boy she fed before sunrise and taught to read after dark would one day put his name on a tower of glass. "But everything I built because she showed me that a person's worth is not measured by what they own. It is measured by what they give." He paused and let the silence do its work. 500 people held their breath. "Over the decades, I have made many decisions from this lectern. Some were right, some I would change if time allowed. But the decision I am making today is the one I am most certain of in my entire life." In the front row, Rosa sat with her handbag in her lap and her eyes already shining. She was wearing her best dress, the navy one she saved for important occasions, and beside her Dorothy held Rosa's hand with both of hers, their fingers intertwined like the roots of two trees that had grown side by side without knowing they shared the same soil. "Today, I am retiring. Not because I am tired, but because I have found someone who carries the same values, the same character, and the same dignity that made this company what it is. Someone who proved herself not through connections or privilege, but through work, through sacrifice, through the quiet, relentless refusal to let anyone else define her worth." He turned toward the stage door. "I would like to introduce the new chairwoman of the Meridian Harcourt Group, Miss Serena Caldwell." Serena stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her face, and for a fraction of a second, the world went white. And then it came into focus, sharp and vivid and overwhelming. 500 faces looking up at her. 500 people who had watched her stand in the third row and be told she was not good enough. 500 witnesses who were now seeing her walk to the lectern where the man who fired her had once stood. She found Bryn Hollister in the fourth row. Bryn was crying and smiling simultaneously, one hand over her mouth, the other giving a thumbs up that shook with emotion. Around her, colleagues who had once looked away when Serena walked down the corridor were now watching her with something she had never seen directed at herself in that building: admiration. Serena reached the lectern. She placed her hands where Leonard's had rested moments before and felt the wood warm beneath her palms. "I didn't prepare a speech," she began, and her voice echoed through the auditorium with a steadiness that surprised even her, "because everything I need to say fits in one sentence my mother taught me when I was a child, and we had almost nothing. You are going to be someone, my love, not because the world will hand it to you, because you will build it with your own hands." She paused and looked across the rows. "I stood in this auditorium not long ago and was told I didn't have the competence to be here. I was told to collect my things and leave, and I did. I walked out through those doors carrying a cardboard box with a mug that says, 'Brave before coffee,' and a photograph of my mother on the day I was hired, still wearing her cleaning uniform under her coat because she came straight from a shift to celebrate with me." Her voice caught, but she steadied it. "I want you to know that I am not standing here because I forgot what happened. I'm standing here because I remember every second of it, and I chose to let that moment teach me instead of break me." She looked at Rosa. Her mother's tears were falling freely, but she was nodding. A small, fierce nod that carried decades of early mornings and bleach-scrubbed floors and sacrifices made without a single complaint. "Mum, everything I am is because of you. You came to this country with nothing, and you cleaned the offices of buildings like this one so that I could walk through the front door. You taught me that dignity is not something the world gives you or takes away. It is something you carry inside, and no one, no title, no termination, no man in an expensive suit can touch it." Rosa pressed both hands against her heart and lowered her head. Dorothy put an arm around her shoulders and held her close, and their joined silhouette in the front row was the most beautiful thing Serena had ever seen from a stage. "And to you," Serena said, turning to Leonard, who stood at the side of the stage with his hands clasped before him, "who searched for me when I believed I had been forgotten. who watched over me through the hands of people I trusted without knowing why, who believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself. Thank you for showing me that family is not only the people who are near, it is the people who never stop trying to find you." Leonard let his tears fall without hiding them. They traced the deep lines of his face and dropped onto the lapel of his grey suit, and he made no move to wipe them away. He simply stood there, watching his great niece command the room he had built, and he smiled with every part of himself. The auditorium rose. 500 people standing, applauding, many of them weeping openly. It was not polite, corporate applause. It was the sound of 500 people who had witnessed something that went far beyond a leadership transition, the story of a woman who had come from nothing, been humiliated, underestimated, sabotaged, and who stood now at the lectern not because of blood or favor, but because she had refused at every turn to become less than she was. The applause lasted for a long time. It rolled through the auditorium like thunder that refuses to fade, growing rather than diminishing, as though every person in that room were pouring into the sound everything they had witnessed and everything they wished they had said when they watched a young woman walk out carrying a cardboard box and the ruins of 4 years of work. When the applause finally softened, Leonard walked to the lectern one last time. He stood beside Serena, and with slow, deliberate movements he unclasped the old watch from his wrist. "This watch belonged to my father," he said, holding it so the light caught the scratched glass and the worn leather strap. "He wore it every working day of his life. When he gave it to me, he said, 'The time on this watch does not matter. What matters is what you do with the time you have.' I wore it the day I signed the papers for this building. I wore it the day I read your father's letter. And I wore it the day I finally found you." He took Serena's hand, turned it palm up, and placed the watch gently into it. The metal was warm from his skin. The leather was soft from years of wear, and the quiet ticking, steady, faithful, unhurried, seemed to beat in time with her own heart. "The legacy is not the building, my girl," Leonard said softly. "The legacy is what we carry inside." Serena closed her fingers around the watch and held it against her chest. She looked out at the auditorium, at the 500 faces, at Bryn wiping tears in the 4th row, at Dorothy and Rosa holding each other in the front row, at Leonard standing beside her with the pride of a man who had searched for decades and finally found what he had been looking for. She understood now what her father had tried to say in his letter, what her grandmother Alma had taught her brother with a torch and a borrowed notebook, what Dorothy had protected through every morning cup of tea and every quiet warning, what Rosa had sewn into every mended strap and every hand-tailored blazer and every bleach-scrubbed floor. The legacy was not power, it was not wealth, it was not a name etched in gold on a glass facade. The legacy was love. It was the stubborn, unbreakable, quietly ferocious love of people who refuse to let the ones they cherish be forgotten. And as the morning light poured through the tall windows and bathed everything in gold, Serena Caldwell, the girl from the small flat, the daughter of the cleaning woman, the employee who was fired in front of everyone, the woman who believed nobody had cared enough to come looking, finally understood that her entire life, even in the darkest and most silent moments, someone had been watching over her. And that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to find the people you love, and that true strength lives not in power or titles, but in the dignity with which we choose to live.